What's the most famous image of Billy the Kid? Is it this one, or maybe this one? What about this one? How about this one? We're gonna look at all those today, and more because they are the most iconic images of Billy the Kid, even though none of them were made by him, and most were made over 100 years after he died. The truth is that for decades, if not centuries, before photography was invented, the only way to see what a person looked like was to have a portrait painted or drawn, and for most people, that never happened. But there was one group of people whose faces did get put on something that would be considered a very early form of mass media: playing cards. Outlaw cards, a sort of precursor to baseball and hockey cards, were first published in the United States around 1834, with the first known deck being printed by the firm of H. Dirks in Philadelphia. For decades, we don't know exactly who these figures on the cards were supposed to represent, but now, thanks to some recent scholarship, we do. In fact, we can learn quite a bit from these cards about how the public saw some of America's most notorious criminals. We'll start with the back of the card, which shows a gallows. This was no accident. As historian Michael L. Newton explains, the gallows was intended to remind purchasers that many of the men portrayed had met their demise on the scaffold, thus adding a morbid fascination to the collection of the set. These decks were usually sold as part of a game called Old Judge, where players would try to match up pairs of criminals with their portraits. If you got a full set, you'd win the pot. Sometimes there would be prizes for getting certain sets of criminals, like 5 murderers or 5 thieves. The first version of the deck contains 24 cards, with 2 versions of each card, one showing the front view of the criminal and one showing the side view. There's also a key included that tells you who each criminal was. Today, we can compare these early portraits with later ones to see how accurate they really were. Some of them are shockingly so. Take the case of Major Samuel Bass, a Texas outlaw who robbed trains and stages in the 1860s. This is his wanted poster. Now here's how he appears on the card. Looks pretty accurate, right? Well, take a closer look. His nose and mouth are much larger than they are on the wanted poster. And when you compare it to another drawing of Bass, you can see that the artist took some artistic license. Most importantly, though, notice that Bass is wearing a black shirt, just like he is in this daguerreotype taken in 1867. It is unlikely that the artist copied the wanted poster without having access to a photograph. So this is evidence that the cards weren't always based on official police or sheriff's drawings, but sometimes were based on photographs. This is a detail I had never noticed before, but once you start looking for it, you start seeing it all over the place. Here's the inside view of Blackjack Ketchum. Notice that his shirt looks suspiciously like the one worn by Jesse James in this photograph. Could it be that this card was based on that photo? Perhaps. And then there's the back of the card for Frank and Jesse James. Frank is on the left and Jesse is on the right. Now, these brothers were notorious for robbing banks and trains and for killing anyone who tried to stop them, including 6 of their own gang members. They were killed in separate incidents, but both died at the age of 34. Now, compare that to the back of the card for the James brothers, the side view. Do you see anything similar? Their ages are listed on the cards as 34, same as when they died. Did the artists copy the wanted posters here, or could this be based on a photograph? If you think you've spotted a pattern here, well, you're absolutely right. All of the outlaw cards are based on either wanted posters or photographs, except for one. When we flip over the card for George Walker, aka Black Bart, we see that the back of the card says that he is wanted in California for robbing stagecoaches, but the front view of him doesn't look like any of the other criminals on the card, or at least not as far as we can tell. His clothes are different, as is his pose. He's holding a gun in one hand and a sack of money in the other. Unlike the others, there's no detail on the back of the card indicating what state he was wanted in, nor is there a list of his crimes. What makes this card stand out even more is that the outfit Black Bart is wearing is extremely similar to the one worn by Billy the Kid in the famous photograph taken by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Was this card an early piece of fan art? Maybe. As we continue our look at these cards, it becomes clear that while some of the details of these drawings vary, they do have a lot in common. Many of the outlaws are wearing almost identical outfits, leading to speculation that the artists may have used a single source for inspiration. That source is likely a photograph, but it's impossible to say for sure. Many of these photos were taken in the late 1860s and 1870 seconds, and it seems possible that a deck of cards based on them was published sometime between then and 1881, when the first surviving deck was discovered. These cards were clearly based on a set of photographs, but why? Why make a deck of cards based on a bunch of criminals? Well, first of all, they were criminals. In the days before television, people were fascinated with crime and violence. The dime novel, which exploded in popularity during the 1860s, often contained lurid tales of murder, rape, and robbery. The most famous dime novel series was the Nick Carter series, featuring a composite detective that author Robert E. Howard called the first American folk hero. The first Nick Carter story was published 3 months before the first known deck of outlaw cards, and one of the most popular dime novel characters was the outlaw, often portrayed as a Robin Hood-type figure who robbed banks and trains and gave the money to the poor. Except he didn't. That legend came later. There's also evidence that early filmmakers were familiar with these cards. Compare the image of the James Brothers on the card with the poster for The James Brothers, a film starring Harry Carey, released in 1915. The outfit is nearly identical, and when we look at the poster for The Life and Death of Billy the Kid, released in 1930, the resemblance to the card is clear. Even the pose is similar. Could it be that the creators of these films were directly inspired by these very cards? It's certainly possible. But who were these mysterious printers of outlaw cards? What we know is that they published several different decks, each containing about 25 cards. Each card measured approximately 3 by 4 inches and was made from a special kind of playing card stock. Decks featured criminals from all over the country and included a variety of murderers, rapists, bank robbers, and train robbers, as well as a few alleged vampires. One deck included 6 women, while another included a mix of criminals and victims of their crimes. A full set of 52 cards cost $1, which was about the price of a fancy shirt at the time. While most of the decks were sold in the eastern part of the country, it's believed that one deck was sold in the west, advertising that the proceeds would go to the families of California's murdered sheriffs. By the end of the 1800s, demand for these cards began to fade, probably because photography became cheaper and more accessible, meaning that more realistic images of criminals could be reproduced. But by that time, their legend was cemented in the public imagination, in dime novels, broadsides, lithographs, and paintings. Here's an example of a painting that was clearly influenced by one of the outlaw cards. This one features members of the Reno Brothers gang, and compare that with the card for Frank and Jesse James. See how the artist copied the format, complete with the side view on the back and the identical clothing. It's not clear how many decks of outlaw cards were printed, but there are currently only 5 known to exist. One full deck is owned by the National Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, D.C. Another partial deck is owned by the Cody Firearms Museum at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming. The rest of the known cards are held in private collections. Today, the subject matter on playing cards is generally limited to playing card suits and sometimes fictional characters. But for a brief time in the mid to late 1800s, some of the most notorious criminals in American history graced the small rectangle surface of playing cards. And that meant that generations of Americans grew up thinking that these drawings and engravings were what the criminals really looked like, regardless of whether they were accurate or not. Now watch Wanted Dead or Alive, the real stories behind the most famous wanted posters. Or check out the secret history of Al Capone's face.